George was characterized by former President Hardesty as one of the great strategic minds of our time. Industrial engineers are a very interesting group of engineers because they have engineering and technology backgrounds, but they're also very savvy in business principles and background. And George blended those two things together very well.
George Bennett has excelled in every way possible, and he is very deserving of being a member of the Academy of Distinguished Alumni. George has been an entrepreneur all of his life. I think part of that is his keen analytical mind. I think part of that is his emotional intelligence, his ability to relate to people, to teach, to lead.
He was a world thinker, a big thinker very, very early on. I've known George Bennett since literally the 3rd grade. He and I were in Sunday school class together, and it was evident very early on that George was extremely bright, because I remember the first 3 questions he asked the teacher was about baby Jesus, the Virgin Mary, and Joseph, and she could not answer the questions. When we got to Morgantown High School, George was elected 3 times our class president and was overwhelmingly elected most likely to succeed in the MHS class of 1962, and believe me, he has done that. At WVU, I did not see that much of George because he was studying night and day for 5 years to become an industrial engineer. I was living in the fraternity having a lot of fun. But the one thing that I do remember between our sophomore or junior year, George Bennett got a summer job working for the Ford Motor Company. While he's working for Ford Motor Company, he designed a computer program that literally saved them millions of dollars.
He's been responsible for creating some of the world's great think tanks there in Boston. He went on to start endeavors in other fields, and he was widely regarded across the country. He served Fortune 500 company executives and boards, and was making a name for himself as one of the first consultants to use analytic methods in the computers in the consulting world.
Well, I remember that President Reagan appointed him, and I know that he was one of the leaders in the Grace Commission, which literally saved this country billions and billions of dollars. And I know he's befriended the Clintons and advised them on occasion, and I know recently that he had President Obama at his office in Boston for a meeting on health care.
When I became president in 1995, I invited George down to speak to our vice presidents and other executives of the university about principles of leadership that would be applicable in an organization this size.
Well, I was very fortunate in the Hardesty administration to be involved on a couple of David's boards, advisory board and governing board, and we consulted George quite often on a number of issues. But the most prominent issue was enrollment. Our dorms were not filled at that time, and we were not reaching the students that we thought we should be reaching. And some of the initiatives that George Bennett advised us to get underway and get started in the mid-90s are the reason why this university has almost 30,000 students today instead of 20,000 students today. Those were very formative years for us, and a lot of right decisions were made because of George Bennett's good ideas that he transmitted.
I remember distinctly George using the metaphor of the child's book, Where's Waldo? And he said the thing about Waldo is he's hard to find the first time, but after you find him, it seems obvious that he's been there all along. He said there are principles like that in every organization, and those principles, once identified and once those factors are addressed by the organization improves, and it seems obvious all along that you should have done that. 10 years later, a vice president walked into my office and said, "I found another Waldo." That's the impact George Bennett had on the management of West Virginia University in the late 90s and early 2000s.
He's well recognized in healthcare. His ideas and innovations have been well respected over the years. He is actually working with the ministers of healthcare in both China and India, and may be very heavily involved in looking at and instituting healthcare reform in China.
Well, I think he's a self-made entrepreneur, and he's a person that is not afraid to try things. He's a person that's not afraid to reach out. He's a very compassionate person.
He's very passionate and loyal about the university, and in helping it to be a better institution. As I mentioned, my example with helping David Hardesty early in his administration develop strategic management principles which David applied and still endure at the university. He's very passionate about helping do those things, and he feels good about that, but he's one of these people who's very unassuming, likes to do this from behind the scenes. So you don't hear a lot about that, you don't see it.
I hate to admit it, but I've known George for 45 years. And I think he has consistently represented the university well. He's always been a performer. He's always exhibited excellence in everything he does. He's always remembered West Virginia University when talking to people, and he's remembered us over the years.